Okay, let's get right into this one. I lined up a bunch of Lego to represent the entirety of human history. I thought it might be a fun idea, and it was. And here it is. The model is 550 studs long, kind of a similar length to my entire bedroom, as you can see. Each stud represents 5,000 years for a grand total of 2,750,000 years of history covered. Although, of course, almost all of this is technically prehistory. One little disclaimer before we begin properly. The times for events on this timeline are very rough, debated over by experts, and in many cases are based off one particular bit of evidence. Don't put too much stock in the exact dates I come up with. Okay, let's get to it. Okay, first thing on the timeline, Homo habilis. I think that's how you say that species name. So I started here because this is the earliest date we've found for evidence of the genus Homo. Homo in this context meaning man. This is an umbrella word we use to describe all species of humans, so you've got your Homo sapiens, like me and probably you, and then you've got what are called archaic humans, like Neanderthals and all the other species of humans we used to perceive as vacant knuckle-draggers. And this is the first of those humans, Homo habilis, handyman. As you can see, they are quite short, hence the mini legs. They were about 3'4" to 4'5", so kind of halfway between the sort of like squatting down chimp stature and what we look like now. They kind of look a bit gorilla-y. Look at their skull shape, and they're covered in hair. So again, very much feels like a halfway missing link, quote-unquote, species between a modern human and the other apes that we share the planet with. They are humans though. These are the first, earliest species of humans we know of. I should point out that I did want to include tool use as one of the points on this timeline, but then during research I found out that tool use actually existed before humans did. Next event, another Homo pops up. Homo erectus. These ones look a bit more like something we'd recognize as human, walking upright, hence the name. Their faces are looking a bit less like a zoo exhibit and more like one of the people you might see on your way to work. They had much bigger brains than the primates who came before. Check out the brow ridge there. Rule of thumb for this species, if you can balance a pencil on it, you've got an erectus. Shortly after coming into existence, Homo erectus leaves Africa. The A sign is for Asia. So if you look back on the timeline now, that's about a third of human history gone, and the entire of that third was spent on just the one continent. 1.8 million years ago, Homo erectus reaches Europe. The E is for Europe. 1.5 million years ago, fire. This is a very, very significant one. When humans start harnessing fire, they start cooking their food. Once they start cooking their food, their bodies are more easily able to digest it, meaning they spend less calories on the digestive process itself, and more calories supporting huge brains that can do lots of thinking. This particular leap in technology is likely the reason we even have the mental capacity to do most of the rest of the stuff on this timeline. 800 to 600,000 years ago, woolly mammoths evolve. This one's a bit out of left field. I've split the difference in the range of dates and put the mammoth here at 700,000 years ago on the timeline. So the mammoth here is actually a very talented elephant actor playing one, as the Lego mammoth was a bit too pricey for a YouTube video. Just so I'm not misleading, there were other species of mammoths before the woolly one. This point on the timeline specifically represents the existence of the woolly mammoth. So basically I included this to show the vast period of time we are actually covering in this video. Even though humans have only been around for a small part of the history of the universe, we're still covering hundreds of thousands of years in this video, and we're actually looking at a period of time longer than this entire species have been around, this iconic species. And speaking of new species popping up, we've finally got a species of human similar enough to us to want to and that's not a joke. Modern humans absolutely did breed of these people. Neanderthals are the closest species to Homo sapiens. They extensively used tools, buried their dead, had a sense of aesthetics, and participated in lots of the technological advancements and practices we're going to cover going forward. They even dipped their toes into the waters of seafaring. 300,000 years ago, Homo sapiens. Not just humans, humans. The humaniest humans there ever were. This date is based off the earliest Homo sapien fossil we've found, so we might have been around longer. Nowhere near as long as the concept of humans in general. To reiterate, humans as we know them have only been around 1/6 of the time humans in general have. 170,000 years ago, Homo sapiens begin wearing clothes. I guess once you aren't living in rainforests, savannas and the Sahara Desert, you start thinking it's a good idea to put on some pants. Clothes existed before in a rudimentary sense. Other homos and even hominids made simple garments, but this is where clothing really started to become fashionable. I think getting dressed is a pretty standard step in the getting ready process for those of you who aren't unemployed, but as much an essential part of the human experience it feels, wearing clothes simply hasn't been a thing for most of our history. 50,000 years ago, Homo sapiens reach Australia. 40,000 years ago, Neanderthals die out. We do not know why. We may have done it, we being Homo sapiens. It might have just been we naturally outcompeted them. Also, all the other archaic humans are also dead, so from here on, Homo sapiens are the only ones left. Don't be too sad about this. The Neanderthal does live on in all of us to a certain extent, because of the inbreeding. 40,000 years ago, cave paintings. Art of different kinds, like sculptures, might actually predate humans altogether, but the classic splashing paint on a flat surface practice began around this point. 30,000 years ago, dogs domesticated for the very first time. Bear in mind this is a very, very rough estimate. We've been partnering up with dogs for longer than we have with cats, sorry cats, using wheels, planting crops and writing things down. Still, this is only a comparatively small fraction of human history. We were going it alone for the entire rest of this timeline. Okay, so as you can see here, we come to this sort of lumpy white bit on the timeline. This is the last glacial maximum. This is the time period we refer to when we say the Ice Age. Although there was actually an ice age going on all the way from 2.6 million years ago to present day actually. We currently have polar ice caps. Those are quite rare for the history of Earth, and that's what an ice age actually means. The snowy bit on the timeline is the point at which ice coverage was at its greatest extent, which even then only looked like this. There was never a time when the entire human race were wearing 10 layers of furs and living in igloos. There were still deserts, jungles, and tropical islands during this time. 20 to 50,000 years ago, humans reached North America and then very shortly after South America. Hop, skip and a jump over the ice-covered Bering Strait, and humans have now visited every continent. Well, almost every continent. 12,000 years ago, agriculture. It's difficult to objectively measure these things, but I'd say this is the second most important development into getting us to where we are now, after fire. There wasn't just one culture that figured this out. We think it came about 11 separate times in 11 separate places. It just seems to be a very human thing to stick seeds in the ground. Or sticking with the theme of the video, a very recently human thing to do. Millions or possibly billions of humans lived and died without knowing what a wheat was. And now we just have bread as if it's this fundamental element of nature and not something so new it could turn out to be a passing fad that doesn't catch on. 10,000 years ago, metalworking. This would be a good time to talk about the Bronze and Iron Ages. When I came up with the idea for the video, I thought it would be cool to mark out the Stone, Bronze and Iron Ages on the map with different colours. But during research I found that at this scale, both the Bronze Age and the Iron Age fit into the very last stud on the timeline. Every other of the 549 studs represent the Stone Age. And as you can see, we're not quite there yet. Metalworking was happening at this point, but we're not officially in the Bronze Age yet. 7,500 BCE, domestic cats become a thing. Cities also started to exist around this time. 3,500 BCE, the wheel. So it's a very classic caveman cliche, standing around chipping into a stone wheel. And because of that cliche, you'd probably think that the wheel would turn up a lot earlier on the timeline. But here we are on the very last stud, and the wheel's only just appeared. And as you can see from the little scene here, the earliest wheel isn't anything to do with a vehicle, it's actually a potter's wheel. Humans invented the wheel so we could make mugs. 3,200 BCE, written language. Something you probably do almost every day. It's the reason I'm able to write this script, the reason we are able to pass down history from generation to generation, and one of the very first things we learn in school, if we have the privilege of going to one. I'm just going to explain the model for this one a bit, because people will already be wondering what's going on in it. That thing in her hands is actually supposed to be a wax drawing tablet, which is something that was used to draw way, way before we were drawing on bits of tree. 2000 BCE. Woolly mammoths die out. I didn't forget about them. It turns out they were just around for a very, very long time. Still less than a third of the time humans have been around. The last ones to exist were on a place called Wrangel Island. At this point, the Great Pyramid, the Sphinx, and Stonehenge had all been built. 1821. reaching Antarctica. I decided to end the list as humans finally reached the last continent. Polynesian people could have actually discovered Antarctica as early as 600 CE, but 1821 was when we were sure someone actually set foot on it. Also, during this last stud, the moon landing, the internet, the Olympic Games, the entirety of the Roman Empire, almost every nation that has ever existed, both world wars, the printing press, gunpowder, the use of electricity, photography, democracy, plumbing, the Industrial Revolution, the Renaissance, the medieval era, the Vikings, the ancient Greeks, Incas, Aztecs, the Mongol Empire, Hannibal, Julius Caesar, Isaac Newton, Abraham Lincoln, Jesus, the Buddha, Henry VIII and Louis XIV, Marie Curie and Yuri Gagarin, and Billie Eilish and Tutankhamun. Every major world religion, sliced bread and video games. Me, you, all your family and friends, assuming you have any, and their parents and their parents. Every word ever put to paper, screen or tablet. Everything that exists in the room with you right now, unless you're in a museum, and even then it's likely. 99% of everything we think of as the human experience all started in this one last step of the story. All of this human experience looked absolutely nothing like what us or any of our recent ancestors experienced. There's probably some kind of lesson to be learnt here about what's normal or traditional or even natural about human behaviour, how impermanent and new our civilization is, and even how new the concept of civilization itself is. What your life looks like is not the typical human experience, because there isn't one, and it turns out there never was. And that's about it. Thanks for watching. The next video will be a lot smaller in scope and very unlikely to trigger an existential crisis. If you want to see it, please subscribe and hit the bell. My one loyal subscriber, who definitely isn't my mum, didn't even get a notification that I'd uploaded because she didn't hit the bell. Please don't use this video as a source for anything. Bye! $800 to 600,000 years ago. Oh, for sake, someone texted me and ruined it. Don't be too sad about this. The Neanderthals actually do live on... Oh, you texting me right when I'm on a roll. 30,000 years ago. Dogs become... Seagull interrupting me. Holes.